A sad chapter in Australia's history, a blight on the page, an issue which until recently was shunned by the people responsible, as if it never happened. But what did happen with the stolen generations? The issue has been ignored for so long, but remains a big part of the lives of so many people in this country. Why has it taken so long for some recognition? For so many people, they have lived lives empty of culture, of purpose, family and traditions. They have not known anything of a loving family, nothing of heritage and no link to their land. How could this be allowed to happen to any child? It seems so surreal in these modern times to think that just 40 years ago unspeakable things were still being done to the Indigenous Australians, the first inhabitants of this country. But what was being done? Many ask the question, why me? Why was I taken? It's like a hole in your heart that can never heal. The first removal of children happened in 1883. Matthew Morehouse, protector of Aborigines in South Australia, said, "Our chief hope is decidedly in the children, and the complete success as far as regards their education and civilization would be before us, if it were possible to remove them from the influence of their parents." From the start of the colonization at Sydney Cove, some Aboriginal children were taken into the homes of the few settlers for education and training. Some of these children were taken once their parents had passed on, some were entrusted to the settlers by their parents. The majority became lonely and ran away to join their families, or died from the disease. The government passed laws that took the rights away of Aboriginal people. The government, or the police, had the power to control the movement of the Aboriginal people. They could stop them from marrying, working, or owning their own homes. Those laws were called protection laws, and gave the government control of these children. They could take them away, regardless of the wishes of the parents of the children. Many children had white fathers. Some of the fathers wanted to keep the children, but others wanted nothing to do with them. Those children were called half-castes. As the settlement increased, so did the number of half-castes. It was expected back in the 1800s that the population of Indigenous Australians would die out, but the population only increased. In 1937, A. O. Neville, Chief Protector in Western Australia, asked during the National Conference of State and Commonwealth Aboriginal Affairs Ministers, "Are we going to have a population of 1 million blacks in the Commonwealth? Are we going to merge them into our white community and eventually forget that there were any Aboriginals in Australia?" So that is precisely what he did. He thought by teaching the half-castes white ways and separating them from their land and people, he could breed out the black in them in 3 generations. Not all of the European Australians were fine about the half-castes living with the Aboriginal people. They assumed, helped along by the media, that if these children were taken away and educated, they'd become like other white children. But for this to work, the children had to stop seeing their Aboriginal families. The government could only take children away if it was proven that they were neglected or badly treated, but for the majority, little or no proof of neglect was required. For some, the very fact that they were living the Aboriginal way of life was enough. Some families tried to hide their children to prevent them being taken. Sometimes light-skinned children were covered in ash or dirt to make them seem darker, and were left with their families. Parents who tried to stop their children being taken could be put into jail or made to leave for their homes. The children could be taken and put into children's homes. Some were taken as infants and never knew their parents. Those who had grown up with their fellows tried to get home, and unfortunately most were caught and taken back. Other children became used to the life in these homes. The kind staff became like parents for them, but some of the staff were cruel or unfriendly and left the older children to do the mothering for the younger ones. Children weren't permitted to speak their native language. They had to speak English. The food was poor and always the same. Many children went hungry.
Sometimes at night we'd cry with hunger. We would scour in the town dump, eating all bread, smashing tomato sauce bottles, licking them.
Children were punished or beaten or locked up for disobeying the rules. Some children were told their mothers were dead or didn't want them. Some thought they had no family at all. Some of the children remember running away from the strange, dark people who watched them through the fence of the home, scared of them. Little did they know those were actually their families, who had spent months and years trying to find their children. Some children agreed with the way of life and were grateful. They thought it was better for them to get an education and to stop living the way of the Aboriginals. Others violently disagreed. Many were forced into foster homes or were adopted out. The families that took them in could be terrible to them, and many treated them like animals. The idea behind this was that if they were staying with white families, it would be easier for them to forget their own. When they were adopted out, their own parents lost all rights to them. Under the adoption laws, their names could be changed. All of the above happened between 1883 and 1969. Between 1995 and 1996, the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission heard thousands of stories from the children and their families, and as a result, wrote a report called Bringing Them Home. It was handed to the Commonwealth Parliament on the 26th of May 1997. It was the first recognition that the events had happened. One of the recommendations of the report said all parties involved in the taking of children from their families should apologise for the harm they had caused. Many thousands had signed their own personal apology. Unfortunately, the Commonwealth government refused to apologise. Each year on the 26th of May, crowds of people gathered together to remember what had happened. This day is called Sorry Day. Kevin Rudd made an apology to all the people affected by the stolen generation in Parliament on February the 13th, 2008. It was another step in the healing of the scars left by the stolen generation. So the wrongs cannot be undone and the past cannot be changed. We take the first steps towards understanding what happened to the stolen generations. At least we can ensure that it will never happen again.